For more on the 2-year anniversary of Russia's war on Ukraine, let's turn now to my next guest, Democratic Congressman Mike Quigley of Illinois. He is the co-chair of the House Caucus on Ukraine. Congressman, thanks so much for coming on this Sunday night. I first just want to get your reaction to that interview with my colleague Caitlin Collins and President Zelensky. Is the Ukrainian leader putting too much faith in Congress to pass this aid, do you think?
Look, every time I've met President Zelensky, 5 or 6 times since the war began, he's been nothing but appreciative and forthcoming about the conflict. But he's absolutely right that our aid is essential. And, I guess you never lose money betting against Congress. But he has to keep hope because his people's existence is dependent upon our acting in good faith.
And so just to remind everyone, as we've kind of talked about leading up to our interview with you, right now that aid is stalled in the House, and White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan putting the blame squarely on the Republican House Speaker Mike Johnson. Let's listen to what he told Ardana Bash this morning.
The reality is that Putin gains every day that Ukraine does not get the resources it needs, and Ukraine suffers. And there is a strong bipartisan majority in the House standing ready to pass this bill if it comes to the floor. And that decision rests on the shoulders of one person. And history is watching whether Speaker Johnson will put that bill on the floor. If he does, it will pass, will get Ukraine what it needs for Ukraine to succeed. If he doesn't, then we will not be able to give Ukraine the tools required for it to stand up to Russia, and Putin will be the major beneficiary of that.
And so, Congressman, I'm curious if you agree, if Speaker Johnson is essentially, if he doesn't put this on the floor, if he's essentially helping the Kremlin, helping Putin.
Well, there's a term we came up with a few years ago, people who are apologists to Putin, who also misled the public with what's going on. We called them useful idiots. They're none more useful than the presumptive nominee for president of the United States on the Republican side. I'd ask Speaker Johnson not to be a useful idiot to someone who's such a bloody tyrant. Do you really want to forget the lessons of the Second World War and why we fought that war and why so many gave their last full measure of devotion? Do we really want to say never again and perhaps not mean it? I stood on the mass graves at Bucha, and I saw what Putin is capable and is going to do if we don't do this. It is not that hard. Speaker Johnson, what are you afraid of? The bill gets on the floor. It'll probably get about 300 votes. It got 70 votes in the Senate. This sort of thing doesn't happen, and indeed, history is watching.
And so just to underscore for people listening and watching at home what you just said, which is if this bill were to go to the floor, it's going to have, in your opinion, and that's the conventional wisdom, overwhelming bipartisan support. So this really, it's not a question of if there are votes there, right?
Absolutely. Look, when there was a standalone bill in November, it got about 300 votes, 101 Republicans. I guess there's 100 Reagan Republicans left who supported the Reagan doctrine. But as you know, that's more than enough. So, again, he has every opportunity. And frankly, if he doesn't, we have no choice but to try to force the bill on the floor and get some of those 100 Republicans to take a tough stance and sign on to what we call a discharge petition.
Right. And those discharge petitions, not to bore everyone, but there is a lot that goes into that. They're very difficult logistically to get through. It's really a tough needle to thread. But are you confident at this point, if you all had to rely on that is something that could work?
Look, they don't work very often, but I think this has historic qualities, and my colleagues on the other side who care about this know that they're going to have to take that. We're not talking about a lot of Republicans, right? Maybe not even double digits that would have to sign on, because you'd have virtually every Democrat signing. The margins are so narrow and so much is at stake. And I know that for some people, they see these as tough votes. My answer to that is, what in the hell did you come to Congress for? Just to vote for the simple things, the easy things? There's so much at stake here. And I think it's important to remember that not just Putin is watching, but our friends and foes are watching. Can those who want to count us in the future? And can those who want to challenge us they're watching this too in Beijing and Tehran, and they're recognizing that perhaps our resolve as the West is only as strong as a handful or just as few as one person who's willing to be that weak link and hurt not just Ukraine, but our own national security.
Congressman, do you think that the Biden administration has done a good enough job explaining to Americans what this aid is? Because there is a sense from a lot of everyday Americans that they think this is just a blank check that is going overseas to another nation when there are real problems at home. I was talking with Democratic strategist Paul Begala on another one of our shows, and he said that he would reframe it as kind of, no, we're rearming America. We're sending them our old weapons. We're building new weapons in American facilities. Do you think that that message is getting out to everyday Americans to help them understand what this actually is?
It is, but it's tough. Every war is tough to win at home, so to speak. I mean, even in the Second World War, there were movies, Why We Fight, reminding the American people why it mattered. And our own blood was being shed, and our interest was obviously there. So it's difficult. You know, I would remind people that Secretary Austin and General Milley brought this home and said that if we don't stand up to Putin's aggression, we're just asking to a situation where we would have to invite more bloodshed and double our own budget. Because again, Putin's aims go well beyond Ukraine into Moldova, Georgia, and then, of course, in the Baltics and NATO countries to, in his mind, rebuild the Soviet Union. So it is extraordinarily short-sighted and not really paying attention to the facts to recognize that conflict is our conflict. And it's, again, why we formed NATO and the United Nations, and that should bring it home.
And of course, NATO has been the subject of so much conversation, with the former president making those comments that he would allow Putin to do whatever the hell he wanted if they didn't pay their fair share. But if he continued, to your point, to move forward like this, it could put some of those NATO countries at risk.
Oh, absolutely. And that's one of the frustrating parts. Clearly, it's not Speaker Johnson who's making this decision. He's making it based on orders from candidate Trump. So that's where all of this is coming from. I don't know that Speaker Johnson has the requisite understanding of what's at risk here. But you know, if we're going to let former President Trump call these shots, let's just remember how close he was to President Putin, how he never, ever criticized him and wanted us to pull out of NATO, risked that several times, and was the ultimate isolationist, risking us at home and abroad.
And before I let you go, just quickly, there are some congressional deadlines just about a week away to fund the government and prevent a government shutdown. You all have come up against this several times and passed some short-term spending bills. What's the status of that? Do you believe that Congress will be able to avoid another partial shutdown?
Only if we do a continuing resolution, which is a short-term spending bill, which is absolutely no way to run a country this size. It's extremely risky. It also puts the cost of government, the credit rating, higher. And again, the rest of the world is watching our dysfunction. Our dysfunction has become a national security threat. Let's just remember, putting aside, it's hard to do, putting aside what we're trying to do with this bill, dealing with Ukraine and Israel, we haven't funded our own military yet. We've only got a couple weeks to do that. Let's get the basics done to protect ourselves at home and our allies abroad.
Yeah, and just worth noting, we're now being told, my colleague Melanie Zanona reporting, that this spending deal to avoid a government shutdown that they thought might come out today is no longer expected. They've hit some more snags. So more to come on that. Congressman Mike Quigley of Chicago, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.